What is life like inside the Emperor's palace? They called me precise. For 17 years, I had maintained illumination schedules for the outer cloisters of the Emperor's palace, calibrating lumen globes against the sacred chronometry that governed all life within those golden walls. My supervisor said my devotion showed in the steadiness of my hand. I believed him. I believed that every lumen I lit was a prayer made manifest, that my work upheld the radiance of the God, Emperor himself. My name is Cassia Ven. I served as Lumen Warden 3rd Class in the Palace District of Eternal Vigil. And I want you to understand something: the light I kept burned brightest over places where truth went to die. I am speaking to you from a place beyond duty now, beyond service, beyond the walls I once thought were the boundaries of reality itself. If you are reading this, then my testimony has survived where I could not. What I am about to tell you is not sedition. It is not heresy. It is simply what I saw, what I learned, what I became when the light I tended revealed what it was truly illuminating. The palace was my world. I was born in the servant warrens of the 4th terrace, delivered by midwives who had themselves been born within those same stone corridors. My mother was a textile maintainer in the vesture halls. My father operated prayer, scroll distribution for the lesser chapels. I never saw terrace sky until I was 23, and even then only as a distant bronze shimmer through armor glass during a maintenance inspection on an outer buttress. The sky was a concept. The palace was reality. My induction into the Lumen Wardens came at age 14, standard for those whose genetic screening showed appropriate manual dexterity and no markers for seditious inclination. The ceremony was brief, held in Chapel Tertius Gamma, where Chaplain Mordrant blessed our hands with sacred oils and reminded us that we served not mere illumination, but the Emperor's sight made physical. Every globe we maintained was his eye watching over his domain. Every shadow we banished was a victory against the darkness that sought to corrupt his realm. The work itself was methodical, which suited my temperament. I woke each day at the 4th toll of the morning bell, the deep bronze sound that resonated through stone corridors thick enough to withstand orbital bombardment. The temperature in the servant warrens remained constant at 16 degrees, maintained by systems older than most planetary civilizations. I could see my breath as I dressed in my uniforms, gray robes marked with the sigil of the Lumen Wardens, a stylized flame crossed with measuring calipers. Breakfast was protein paste dispensed from sanctified nutrient stations, flavored with synthetic grain essence. It tasted of nothing in particular, which was good. Taste was distraction from duty. I ate standing at my assigned consumption station, number 4772, while morning catechisms played from Vox grills overhead. The words were familiar as breathing. The Emperor protects, the Emperor provides, the Emperor sees all. I believed them with the certainty most people reserve for gravity. My daily route covered section Theta 12, a district of administrative cloisters and lesser audience chambers in the outer palace rings. The architecture was older here than human memory, built during ages whose names were lost. Corridors stretched for hundreds of meters, walls adorned with frescoes depicting the Emperor's glory, though the paints had faded to ghost images over millennia. My task was to inspect, calibrate, and replace the lumen globes that kept these spaces illuminated according to schedules determined by the Adeptus Astronomica. Each globe required specific attention. I carried a data slate that listed their designation codes, installation dates, expected operational duration, and blessed replacement intervals. Globe Theta 12479 Alpha, for instance, was installed in the second year of the current millennium and required recalibration every 72 hours to maintain proper luminance. I would unlock the housing with my sanctified maintenance key, test the current draw, adjust the flux capacitor, and log the inspection in my slate. The work demanded precision. A globe burning too bright could disturb meditation in nearby contemplation cells. Too dim, and the shadows might harbor psychological vulnerability to corruption. I took pride in my accuracy. In 17 years, I had never missed an inspection cycle, never allowed a globe to fail before scheduled replacement. My supervisor, Warden Sergeant Callis, reviewed my logs monthly and always found them flawless. He said I had the Emperor's own devotion to order. I cherished those words. They meant my existence had purpose beyond mere survival. The palace revealed itself slowly to those who served within it, layer upon layer of meaning and function. I learned that the golden domes visible from certain high windows were observation sanctums for the Adeptus Astronomica, that the constant vibration in the eastern corridors came from manufactorum complexes, producing bolt rounds for the Adeptus Custodes, that the sweet smell permeating certain levels was sacred incense burned in quantities sufficient to supply entire shrine worlds. Everything had reason. Everything had order. I lived my life in increments measured by bell, tolls, and inspection cycles. 17th toll meant transition to evening rounds. 20. First toll signaled meal distribution. 26th toll was contemplation hour, when we were expected to pray in our cells. I had a shelf of prayer books, their pages soft from handling, and I read them faithfully. The litany of eternal service, the canticle of grateful labor, the hymn of the unquestioning soul. The words shaped my thoughts, gave structure to the formless devotion I felt. My few pleasures were small and sacred. Once per month, I was permitted to attend services in the greater chapel of the luminous path, where thousands of servants gathered beneath vaulted ceilings taller than Hab blocks. The chaplain would speak of our blessed role in the Emperor's grand design, how even the humblest task contributed to humanity's survival. I would feel tears on my cheeks and not be ashamed. I was part of something infinite, something holy. I had friends, or what passed for friendship in that regimented existence. Warden Secundus Hal worked the adjacent sector, and we would sometimes share our mid-shift meal in the communal refectory. He spoke little, as I did, but there was comfort in shared silence. We both understood that our work was prayer. Once, he showed me a commendation he had received for exceptional diligence. I congratulated him genuinely. His pride was my pride. We served the same light. The wrongness began so quietly, I almost missed it entirely. It was during a routine inspection in Corridor Theta, 1297, a minor passage connecting two administrative chambers, rarely used. I was calibrating Globe 97 Delta when I noticed the adjacent chamber's door was slightly ajar. This was irregular. Administrative chambers were to remain sealed when unoccupied, both for security and climate control. I approached, intending to report the oversight to the chamber's designated clerk. Through the gap, I could see a desk covered in parchment, standard administrative workspace. But something caught my eye, a document left open, its contents visible in the amber light from my hand lumen. I should have simply closed the door and logged the security lapse. That would have been proper. But I hesitated, and in that hesitation, I looked. The document was an execution order. I had never seen one before, but the format was unmistakable, the Imperial Aquila watermarked across heavy parchment. The official seals, the signature blocks. It authorized the elimination of a servitor maintenance crew, 14 individuals, for suspected exposure to scrap code corruption. The reason seemed sound. Scrap code was an abomination, a disease of logic engines that could spread like plague. Purging the exposed was standard containment protocol, but there was a notation in the margin, handwritten in neat script. No actual infection confirmed. Eliminate as precaution per efficiency directive. I stared at those words longer than I should have. No actual infection confirmed. They were being executed not because they were corrupted, but because confirming they were clean was deemed inefficient. I told myself this made sense. The Imperium could not take risks. Uncertainty was itself a form of contamination. Better to purge the possibly tainted than risk the definitely pure. This was harsh mercy, the kind necessary in a hostile universe. I closed the door, logged the security lapse, continued my rounds, but the words stayed with me. No actual infection confirmed. That night, during contemplation hour, I prayed for understanding. I asked the Emperor to help me comprehend the wisdom of difficult necessities. I reminded myself that I was a Lumen Warden, not an administratum clerk or inquisitorial agent. My duty was light, not judgment. I had no context for such decisions. Those who made them saw patterns I could not perceive, calculated risks beyond my comprehension. I almost convinced myself. 3 weeks later, I was performing calibration in Section Theta 1241, near the Palace Mortuary processional routes. These corridors were wider, designed to accommodate funeral processions for fallen servants whose service had earned them burial rites. The lumen globes here burned with solemn amber light, color filtered to appropriate solemnity. As I worked on Globe 41 Gamma, I heard voices from the adjacent corridor. 2 men speaking in low tones, though not quite quietly enough. I should not have listened. Eavesdropping was inappropriate. But they were discussing something that caught my attention. Another batch from the Eastern Warrens, one voice said, tired and bureaucratic. 73 this time. Same justification. The second voice asked. Overcrowding. Population exceeded optimal density by 12%. Standard reduction protocol. There was a pause. Then the second voice, quieter. They were families. Children. They were numbers that exceeded parameters. The first voice replied, not unkindly, but with the flat tone of someone reciting doctrine. Would you prefer we wait until overcrowding causes disease? Until we have hundreds dead instead of 73? This is mercy, just applied early. I know the doctrine, the second voice said. I've processed these orders for 6 years. Sometimes I wonder if we measure wrong. If the parameters are set too tight. Not our decision to make. The first voice cut him off, not harshly but firmly. We implement, others calculate. That is the order that sustains the palace. Their footsteps faded. I remained motionless, hands frozen on the globe housing. 73 people. Eliminated not for heresy or corruption or any crime, but for exceeding population parameters by 12%. Prophylactic execution. Pre-emptive culling. I tried to apply the same logic I had used before. This was harsh necessity. The palace was ancient beyond measure, its systems stressed by millennia of continuous operation. Populations had to be controlled. Resources were finite. Difficult mathematics demanded difficult solutions. Better 73 dead than hundreds later from plague or starvation or systemic collapse. But the second voice had said children. I completed my shift mechanically, logging inspections with the same precision I always maintained. But my hands shook slightly, and I had to enter one code 3 times before I recorded it correctly. This disturbance in my routine was itself disturbing. I had always been steady. Now I felt something I could not name, a sensation like standing on unstable ground. That night I could not pray. I sat in my cell with my devotional texts open, but the words would not come. Instead, I kept seeing numbers. 14 servitors, 73 families, percentages and parameters and efficiency directives. I had always believed the Imperium's cruelty was justice made necessary by an evil universe. That every harsh action was response to genuine threat, every purge a surgical removal of actual corruption. But what if some cruelty was just administrative convenience? The thought felt like heresy even forming in my mind. I tried to banish it through prayer, through recitation of catechisms, through sheer force of will. I reminded myself that I knew nothing of the calculations that governed the palace. That complexity I could not perceive surely justified what seemed unjust from my limited perspective. That my doubt was itself a kind of pride, assuming I could judge decisions made by those vastly wiser than myself. I needed to believe that. My entire existence was structured around service to a righteous system. If that righteousness was questionable, then what was I? What had I been doing for 17 years? I decided to stop questioning, to return to the certainty that had always sustained me. I was a lumen warden. I maintained light. That was enough. That had to be enough. But doubt, once admitted, is not easily banished. 2 months passed. I performed my duties with the same technical precision. But something had changed in how I experienced them. Where before I had felt purpose, now I felt routine. Where before I had felt devotion, now I felt obligation. I told myself this was temporary, that faith returned if one simply continued in service. The actions would restore the feelings if I persisted. Then I found the archive. I was performing an extended inspection cycle in the lower administrative levels, areas I rarely accessed. These corridors were older, the stonework rougher, the lumen globes spaced farther apart, so shadows gathered thick between pools of light. My route took me past a door I had never noticed before, or perhaps had simply overlooked. It was marked only with a faded designation, Archive Secundus Theta. The door was ajar, which was irregular enough to require investigation. I pushed it open, hand lumen raised. Inside was a small chamber lined with shelves, each shelf packed with bound ledgers and data slates. Dust covered everything, undisturbed for years at minimum. This was clearly an old records room, long abandoned as the palace's archival systems migrated to newer facilities. I should have simply noted the open door and continued my route. But I had 2 hours remaining in my shift, and some impulse I could not name, made me step inside. The ledgers were old, their binding cracked, their pages brittle. I selected one at random and opened it carefully. The entries inside were population records for the servant Warrens, dating back 60 years. Births, deaths, assignments, terminations. Standard administrative documentation. I was about to return it when I noticed the termination column. Every 3 years, with mechanical regularity, there were mass terminations. Hundreds of entries at once, all on the same date. The reason listed was always the same: population optimization protocol. I pulled another ledger. Same pattern. Another same pattern. 60 years of records, and every 3 years, hundreds dead. Not from disease or accident or even punishment. From optimization. I sat on the dusty floor, surrounded by ledgers, and began to count. The mathematics were simple. Assuming the pattern held before the records I was viewing, and continued after, then over the course of a century, I calculated it 3 times, certain I had made an error. 36,000 people, executed not for any crime, not for any threat, but to maintain population parameters deemed optimal by some formula I would never see. My hand lumen flickered. I realized I was shaking, enough to disturb the light. I set it down carefully, watched the shadows dance across pages of systematic death. These were just the servant Warrens of my section. How many sections did the palace contain? Hundreds, thousands. I thought of my mother, who had died when I was 16. The official record said systemic failure from natural causes. She had been 41 years old. I thought of Warden Secundus Hal's sister, who he said had been relocated to another section last year. He had never heard from her again, but relocations were common, and Vox communication between sections was restricted. I thought of all the small disappearances I had never questioned. The servant who simply stopped appearing at morning muster. The entire maintenance crew replaced without explanation. The children from the education crèche, who we were told had been promoted to better opportunities in the inner palace. How many of those had been optimization? I do not know how long I sat in that archive. Long enough that I missed my next inspection window, the first time I had ever deviated from schedule. Long enough that the trembling in my hands spread to my entire body. Long enough that I had to accept what my mind was screaming at me. This was not harsh necessity responding to genuine crisis. This was systematic population management executed with the same administrative routine as lumen maintenance schedules. Humans reduced to numbers in a ledger, trimmed when they exceeded some threshold determined by logic I could not access and probably would not accept even if I could. I was complicit. Every day I maintained my lights. I illuminated the corridors down which the condemned walked. Every inspection I logged, I participated in the system that determined who lived and who became an optimization statistic. My precision, my devotion, my pride in flawless service, all of it was in service to this. The mechanically regular executions bothered me most. Every 3 years. Not in response to overcrowding or resource crisis, because those would be irregular, responding to actual conditions. This was schedule. This was policy. This was someone deciding that periodic culling was simply part of proper palace maintenance, like replacing worn lumen globes before they failed. I left the archive as the 21st toll sounded, hours late for my assigned meal period. I did not eat. I returned to my cell and sat in darkness, my hand lumen extinguished, and tried to pray. The words would not come. Instead, I kept seeing ledgers, columns of names, dates repeating with mechanical precision. Optimization, efficiency, parameters. The Emperor protects, the Catechism said. But from what? From whom? If the Imperium itself was the threat, what did protection even mean? I reported for duty the next day because I did not know what else to do. My supervisor commented that I looked tired. I told him I had not slept well, which was true. He suggested increased prayer and proper sleep hygiene. I thanked him for his concern. He had no idea that I was seeing him differently now, wondering if he knew. Wondering if everyone knew except me. Wondering if I had been the only one naive enough to believe our service was actually holy. I began to investigate carefully, methodically, using my access as a lumen warden to move through sections most servants never saw. I told myself I was simply performing extended maintenance inspections. I logged everything properly so no one would question my movements. But I was looking for something, though I could not articulate what. Proof, perhaps. Confirmation that what I had discovered in the archive was aberration, not norm. I found the opposite. In a storage annex near the Eastern mortuary facilities, I discovered cremation logs. The palace operated massive crematoriums for disposal of the dead, necessary given the population density. The logs detailed numbers processed, dates, source locations. I cross-referenced them with the population ledgers from the archive. The correlation was perfect. Every 3 years, when the ledgers showed mass terminations, the crematorium logs showed corresponding spikes in processing. Hundreds of bodies, arriving over the course of a week, ash returned to recycling systems where molecular bonds were broken down and constituent elements redistributed. Nothing was wasted in the palace. Even the dead served. I found medical records in a sub-level clinic, filed improperly in a storage locker instead of the main archive. They showed genetic screening results for a group of children from the Eastern Warrens. All results were within normal parameters. No mutation detected, no abnormality noted, but stamped across the file in red ink, population exceeds optimal capacity. Subjects designated for processing. Subjects. Not children, not humans, subjects. I found a prayer manual in a chapel preparation room, left open on a lectern. It contained benedictions for necessary severances, prayers to be said when difficult mathematics required difficult actions, litanies praising the emperor's wisdom in permitting that which must be permitted for the survival of the whole. There were official prayers for systematic murder. The ecclesiarchy had codified it, sanctified it, made it holy. Each discovery was a small detonation in my understanding of reality. I had believed the Imperium was brutal by necessity, that its cruelty was reactive, responsive to genuine threats. I had believed that while individual injustices might occur, the system itself was fundamentally just. I had believed my service contributed to humanity's survival against a hostile universe. But this was not survival. This was administration. This was not defense. This was maintenance. They were not fighting corruption. They were managing resources, and human beings were resources to be managed like lumen, globes or prayer scrolls, or recycled nutrients. 3 months after finding the archive, I was assigned to perform maintenance in a corridor I had never accessed before. Section Theta 12-1, deep in the administrative complexes near the Departamento Munitorum interface zones. The lumen globes here were older models, inefficient but kept operational due to the sanctity of original installation. My orders were to inspect and log, but not replace unless absolutely necessary. The corridor terminated at a large door marked with the symbol of the Adeptus Administratum. As I approached, the door opened and 2 men emerged in deep conversation. One was an administratum clerk, identifiable by his gray robes and databank shoulder satchel. The other wore the black and white of a palace prefect, one of the internal security officers who maintained order among the servant populations. They did not notice me. I was a lumen warden, functionally invisible, as much a fixture as the globes I maintained. They walked past me, talking in voices they did not bother to lower. The calculation is simple. The prefect was saying, current population is 973,000. Optimal range is 850 to 900,000. We are outside parameters by 73,000 units. Units, not people, units. Reduction protocols initiate in 6 weeks. The clerk responded, consulting a data slate. We will target the lowest productivity quartile and highest medical resource consumption demographic. The optimization should bring us back to mid-range optimal. What about genetic viability screening? The prefect asked. Last cycle, we processed several units that could have been relocated to breeding programs. The screening delay was deemed inefficient. The clerk said, tone apologetic but firm. Genetics evaluation takes 14 days per batch. We can process the entire reduction in 9 days without screening. The time saved allows us to maintain production schedules in 7 manufactorums that would otherwise experience disruption. So we are optimizing for production efficiency over genetic value. Correct. The calculations indicate greater overall value in maintaining manufacturum output than in preserving potentially viable breeding stock from the reduction demographic. They turned a corner and their voices faded. I stood motionless, hand lumen forgotten, mind struggling to process what I had heard. They had just discussed the elimination of 73,000 human beings with less emotional investment than I brought to replacing a faulty lumen globe. They had calculated whether it was more efficient to kill people or relocate them for breeding programs. They had decided that 9 days of saved time was worth more than 73,000 lives. And they spoke of it casually, the way I might discuss inspection schedules with another warden. This was their normal. This was routine. This was just Wednesday. I completed my shift through sheer force of habit. my hands performing familiar actions while my mind spiraled. 73,000 people in 6 weeks, because the population was 8% above optimal parameters. Not because of heresy or corruption or any threat, because the numbers were wrong and humans were numbers to be corrected. That night, I did not return to my cell. I could not bear the confinement, the familiar walls, the prayer books that now seemed like instruments of deception. Instead, I wandered corridors I was not assigned to, using my maintenance credentials to access areas typically restricted. I was not sure what I was looking for. Answers, perhaps. Or evidence that I was wrong, that I had misunderstood, that there was some piece of information that would make this all make sense again. I found my way to an observation deck, a small balcony overlooking one of the inner courtyards. It was past the 26th toll, deep into sleep cycle, and the courtyard was empty. I stood at the railing and looked down at the cobblestones worn smooth by millennia of foot traffic. How many of those feet had belonged to people marked for optimization? How many had walked those stones not knowing they had been designated as units exceeding parameters? Warden Venn. I turned sharply. Standing in the archway behind me was Warden Captain Mordrain, head of the Lumen Wardens for the entire Theta District. He was an old man, perhaps 70, with augmetic eyes that glowed faintly amber in the darkness. He had served for 52 years, longer than I had been alive. I had met him perhaps 6 times, always in formal inspection contexts. He was legend among the wardens, perfect service maintained across half a century. Captain, I managed, straightening to attention. I apologize. I needed air. This is not your assigned area, he said, not unkindly. He stepped onto the balcony, moved to stand beside me at the railing. Up close, I could see he was exhausted, deep lines carved into his face, shoulders slightly bowed. You have been deviating from your routes frequently over the past months. Your logs remain flawless, but your deviation patterns have been noted. My heart hammered. Deviation patterns. They were watching. Of course they were watching. The palace saw everything. I started, then stopped. What could I say? That I had been investigating. That I had discovered systematic murder. That I no longer believed. You have questions, Mordrain said quietly, still looking out over the courtyard. I had them too, at your age. Every warden who serves long enough eventually has them. I stared at him. His augmetic eyes clicked softly, focusing on something in the distance. Or perhaps nothing at all. You found the archive, he continued. Archive Secundus Theta. It was left accessible deliberately. Not as trap, but as test, perhaps. To see who notices, who questions. You knew. My voice came out strained. I helped compile those ledgers, he said simply. For the first 20 years of my service, part of my duty was logging the terminations. Every 3 years, I would record the names, assign them their final designation codes, ensure proper processing. I was very good at it. Precise. Thorough. He paused. Like you. I could not speak, he continued. You want to know why, he said. You want to understand how this serves the Emperor, how this is anything other than horror codified as protocol. Yes, I nodded, not trusting my voice. He turned to face me fully. His augmetic eyes were unsettling, their gaze mechanical and unwavering. But his voice was tired, infinitely tired. I do not know if it is just, he said quietly. I have not known for 40 years. But I know the alternatives. He gestured out at the palace, at the vast golden domes and towering spires visible even in darkness. The palace houses approximately 100 million souls. Servants, scribes, wardens, guards, maintenance personnel. All the invisible machinery that allows the Imperium to function. The systems that sustain us are 10,000 years old. They strain under the load. We exist at the absolute maximum of what these ancient mechanisms can support. So we kill people to manage the strain. I asked, and I did not care if the bitterness in my voice was insubordination. We kill some to prevent killing all, he replied. If we allow population to exceed what the systems can support, the systems fail. Water recycling collapses. Atmosphere processors fail. Nutrient production becomes insufficient. And then we do not lose 73,000. We lose millions. Starvation, disease. System cascade failure that kills indiscriminately. Then expand the systems, I said desperately. Improve them. There must be ways to increase capacity. With what resources? Mordrain asked, not confrontationally, but as genuine question. The Imperium fights on 10,000 fronts simultaneously. Every Forge world operates at maximum output, producing weapons, ships, ammunition. Every world strains to feed populations barely able to feed themselves. Terra itself is a corpse world. Its surface scarred, lifeless, maintained only through systems that themselves barely function. There is no surplus. There is only insufficient resource distributed according to calculations of necessity. So we kill the weak, I said. The unproductive, the old, the sick, anyone who consumes more than they produce. Yes, he said simply. The admission sat between us, stark and terrible. That is monstrous. Yes, he agreed again. It is also arithmetic. 73,000 dead in organized processing, or 700,000 dead in chaos and systemic failure. We choose the smaller horror. We choose to remain complicit in controllable atrocity rather than allow uncontrollable catastrophe. I turned away from him, gripping the railing until my knuckles went white. There must be another way. There must be choices beyond which mass murder is most efficient. If you find one, please share it, Mordrain said, and there was something bleak in his tone that made me look back at him. I have spent 40 years searching. I have analyzed resource distributions, population models, system capacity projections. I have lost sleep calculating whether there exists any configuration of available resources that would permit us to support current populations without periodic reduction. I have found none. Perhaps I lack imagination. Perhaps I lack courage to see beyond the paradigm I was trained within. But I have found no alternative. So you just accept it, continue serving it. He closed his augmetic eyes, an oddly human gesture from mechanical orbs. When he opened them, something in his expression had shifted. I do not accept it, he said quietly. I live with it. There is a difference. Acceptance implies peace. I have not had peace in 4 decades. But someone must maintain the lights. Someone must ensure the systems continue functioning. Someone must be willing to bear the knowledge of what we do and continue doing it anyway. Because the alternative is worse. I have chosen to be that person. I do not know if I am right. I have never known. But I chose responsibility over innocence, and I live with what that means. How? I asked, and hated the pleading in my voice. How do you live with it? He looked at me for a long moment. Badly, he said finally. I drink. I pray, though I am not certain to what. I cry sometimes, when I am alone. I think constantly about the names I logged, wonder who they were, what they might have become. I imagine the children I helped designate for processing, grown old in some world where they were allowed to live. I torture myself with might have beens. And then I wake up and I maintain the lights, because if I do not, someone else will, and they might not carry the weight I carry. They might optimize without grief. That would be worse. That is not righteousness, I whispered. That is just momentum, complicity sustained by exhaustion. Yes, he said for the 3rd time. But show me righteousness that scales. Show me mercy that feeds millions. Show me compassion that prevents systems collapse. I am not being rhetorical. If such things exist, I want to know them. But in their absence, I choose the lesser evil, and I live with being someone who makes such choices. I am damned either way. I choose to be damned while keeping the lights burning." He turned to leave, then paused at the archway. "You have a choice now, Warden Venn. You can accept what you have learned and continue serving, carrying the knowledge as I do. Or you can refuse and face what refusal means. But you cannot unlearn what you know. That innocence is gone. What happens if I refuse?" I asked. "You will be processed," he said simply. "Designated for optimization. Not as punishment, but as resource management. Those who cannot maintain function in the system become inefficient elements." "Inefficiency is optimized." He paused. "I would grieve for you. I grieve for all of them. But I would sign the designation, because that is my function. And I have chosen to remain functional." He left me alone on the balcony. I stood there until the morning bells began to toll, watching the sky lighten to bronze through the armor glass, thinking about choices and complicity, and the distance between righteousness and necessity. I tried to return to duty. I truly tried. For 2 weeks, I maintained my rotes, inspected my globes, logged my findings with the precision I had always maintained. I told myself I could compartmentalize, could keep the knowledge separate from the service, could be like Mordrain and choose function over conscience. But I could not look at the servants I passed in corridors without wondering if they had been designated, could not perform inspections near the mortuary facilities without thinking of crematorium logs, could not pray without the words curdling in my mouth, bitter with recognition that every litany was justification for systematic murder. I started making mistakes, small ones at first, a calibration performed incorrectly, an inspection logged late, but they accumulated. My supervisor noticed, asked if I was ill, suggested I report to the Medica for evaluation. I declined. I knew what would follow. Medical evaluation would reveal psychological dysfunction. Dysfunction would be deemed inefficiency. Inefficiency would be optimized. I began to understand that I had 3 options. I could continue serving until I broke completely, until my dysfunction became obvious enough to warrant optimization. I could end myself, take control of my final choice before it was taken from me. Or I could refuse openly, make my defiance explicit, force them to acknowledge what they were doing. I chose the 3rd option, not because it was noble, not because I believed it would change anything, but because I needed to say out loud that I knew, that I understood, that I would not pretend this was righteous or necessary or anything other than what it was. I requested audience with Warden Captain Mordrain. He granted it immediately, as though he had been expecting it. We met in his office, a small chamber lined with service records and devotional texts. He sat behind his desk, augmetic eyes fixed on me, and waited. "I cannot continue," I said. "I will not maintain lights over corridors where the condemned walk. I will not participate in a system that murders for efficiency. I will not pray to justify what cannot be justified." He nodded slowly, unsurprised. "You are choosing non-function." "I am choosing to remain human." "Humanity is not preserved through death," he said quietly. "It is preserved through survival, no matter the cost." "Survival is not the same as humanity," I replied. "If we become monsters to survive, what exactly are we preserving?" He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, he looked impossibly old. I asked myself that question 40 years ago. I still ask it. But I work while I ask. "You will stop working. That is the difference between us." "Yes," I agreed. "That is the difference." He reached for a data slate on his desk. "Input commands with practiced efficiency. I am designating you for optimization," he said, voice flat with the effort of remaining professional. "Processing will occur in 3 days. You will be held in contemplation cells until then. Standard protocol. I understand. For what it is worth, he said, and his voice cracked slightly, the first time I had heard his composure break. I am sorry. You were an exceptional warden. Your service record was flawless. In a better universe, you would have been honored for your devotion. In a better universe, I said, my devotion would not have been to this. They came for me an hour later. Palace prefects, professional and efficient, escorting me to the contemplation cells in the sub-levels. The cells were small, perhaps 2 meters square, lit by a single lumen globe that burned with unwavering amber light. There was a prayer bench, a water dispenser, and nothing else. The door sealed with a pneumatic hiss. I sat on the bench and waited. I had 3 days. 3 days to reconcile myself to death, to make peace with my choice, to pray or rage or grieve. I chose to think, to process what I had learned, to understand completely before the end. I thought about Warden, Captain Mordrain, carrying 40 years of grief and complicity, maintaining lights while hating what those lights illuminated. I thought about the prefect and the clerk, discussing 3,000 murders with casual efficiency. I thought about my supervisor, who had praised my devotion, who almost certainly knew what that devotion served. I thought about the system itself, vast and ancient and hungry, consuming human beings as fuel to sustain its own continued operation. And I thought about the emperor. The priests taught that he sat upon the golden throne, enduring endless agony to keep the Astronomicon burning, to preserve humanity across the void. They taught that every sacrifice made in his name was sacred, that suffering itself was holy when offered in service. They taught that the Imperium, for all its cruelty, was the only bulwark against extinction. But what if the cruelty was not necessary defense? What if it was just the default state of a system too vast and too old to change? What if the Emperor himself, if he still possessed awareness in his endless torment, looked upon what had been built in his name and wept? I did not know. I would never know. But I knew that I could not serve it anymore. Not with my hands. Not with my prayers. Not with my complicity. On the second day, they brought me a visitor. I looked up as the door opened, expecting a priest come to offer final benedictions. Instead, Warden Secundus Hal stood in the doorway, permission granted for brief visitation. He sat on the floor across from me, and for a long time, we said nothing. We had never needed many words. They told us you malfunctioned, he said finally, that you experienced psychological breakdown. They are processing you for mercy. Is that what they are calling it? I asked. He looked at me with eyes that held more understanding than I expected. I know, he said quietly. About the optimizations, about the population management, I have always known. My mother was processed when I was 12. Low productivity, high resource consumption. I was young enough to be reassigned, so they kept me. Her they optimized. I stared at him. You knew. All this time, you knew? Yes. How do you serve them? The question came out raw. How do you maintain lights for them knowing what they do? Because if I do not, someone else will, he said, echoing Mordrain's logic. Because my function keeps me alive. Because I am a coward. He met my eyes. Because I am not as brave as you. This is not bravery, I said. This is just inability. I cannot make myself continue. That is what bravery is, he replied. The inability to accept what is unacceptable, even when acceptance would preserve you. He stood, prepared to leave. At the door, he turned back. Your light was steadier than mine. I wanted you to know that. You mattered. After he left, I wept. Not from fear of death, but from the recognition of how many people like Hal existed within the system. How many knew, how many understood, how many hated what they did, but did it anyway, because survival demanded participation. The system sustained itself not through ignorance, but through the deliberate choice of millions to remain complicit because the alternative was their own optimization. The Imperium did not survive through faith. It survived through fear and the calculated willingness of its servants to become monsters rather than victims. On the third day, Warden Captain Mordrin came to my cell. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the corridor light, and I saw how much the weight he carried had bent him. How much it cost him to be the person who signed the designations, who maintained function while knowing exactly what that function served. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Before the end, do you think less of me for continuing?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally. "I think you are doing what you believe is necessary. I think you carry a burden I cannot carry. I think you have made different calculations about what is bearable. I do not think less of you. I just cannot be you." He nodded slowly. "I think more of you," he said quietly, "for having the strength I lack, for choosing integrity over survival. I wish." He stopped, started again. "I wish I could do the same, but I cannot. I have spent 52 years as part of this machine. I do not know how to be anything else." "You are not the machine," I told him. "The machine does not grieve. The machine does not question. You carry those things. That matters. Does it?" He asked, and the despair in his voice was absolute. "What good is grief that changes nothing? What value is questioning that leads to no different action?" "I do not know," I admitted, "but it is the difference between being human and being a servitor. You still feel. That has to matter. I will sign your termination order in 3 hours," he said. "It will be processed efficiently. You will not suffer. This is the last mercy I can offer. I know." He left without another word. I sat alone in my cell and watched the lumen globe burn its steady amber light. Somewhere above me, other wardens were maintaining other lights, performing their duties with precision and devotion, believing or not believing, or simply existing in the gray space between faith and knowledge that most human beings occupied. The system would continue. My death would change nothing. The optimizations would proceed on their 3-year schedule. The ledgers would record names and numbers. The crematoriums would process bodies. The palace would endure, golden and eternal and hungry. But I would die knowing what I knew. I would die having refused complicity. I would die as myself, not as a function of the machine. That was not victory. It was barely even defiance. But it was all I had. They came for me at the appointed hour. 2 prefects, professional and courteous, escorting me through corridors I had maintained for 17 years. We passed lumen, globes I had calibrated, chambers I had inspected, spaces I had kept illuminated through devotion that now seemed like a fever dream. We descended into the lower levels, where the crematoriums operated with constant efficiency. I could smell the sweet smoke, could hear the distant roar of flames, could feel the heat rising through ventilation grates in the floor. Other people were being processed simultaneously. I was just one designation among many. The processing chamber was clean and clinical, lit by harsh white lumen panels that left no shadows. There was a restraint chair, monitoring equipment, an injection port for the toxins that would stop my heart quickly and efficiently. The whole procedure was designed for minimal resource expenditure and maximum throughput. They had optimized even death itself. The prefect who secured my restraints was perhaps 30 years old. He worked with practiced efficiency, checking straps, verifying my designation code against his data slate, preparing the injection system. His movements held no malice, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. This was his function. He performed it well. "Do you have final words?" he asked, as protocol required. They will be logged for archival purposes. I thought about what I wanted to say. Some grand statement of defiance, perhaps. Some condemnation of the system. Some final assertion of humanity against the machine. But what came out was simpler. I was a good warden, I said. I kept the lights burning faithfully. I believed I was serving something sacred. I was wrong about what I served, but I was not wrong about the devotion. That mattered. I mattered. We all mattered. Everyone they have optimized, everyone they will optimize. We were not just numbers. We were people. Remember that. Please. We were people. The prefect nodded, logged my words into his data slate. I wondered if anyone would ever rid them. I wondered if it made any difference. The injection burned cold as it entered my veins. I could feel it spreading. Could feel my heart beginning to slow. Could feel the systems of my body shutting down with the same efficiency that had governed my life. The lumen panels above me remained steady, unwavering, illuminating my death with the same reliable light I had once maintained. My last thought was a prayer, though I did not know to whom I prayed. Not to the Emperor who permitted this. Not to the system which executed it. Perhaps to nothing at all. Or perhaps to the idea that somewhere, in some far future, humanity might find a way to survive without consuming itself. The light faded. The prayer remained unfinished. I am dead now. I have been dead for what I calculate to be approximately 6 weeks, though time has little meaning in the archives where my testimony has been hidden. A friend, whose name I will not record to protect them, retrieved my final words from the processing logs and placed them here, in Archive Secundus, Theta, where I once found the ledgers that destroyed my faith. If you are reading this, you are someone like I was. Someone who questions. Someone who notices. Someone who cannot make themselves believe that efficiency justifies everything, that survival permits any atrocity, that the system's continuation is worth any price. I do not know what you should do. I cannot tell you to resist, because resistance led to my death and changed nothing. I cannot tell you to comply, because compliance is slow suicide of the soul. I cannot tell you to hope, because I do not know what there is to hope for. But I can tell you what I learned. The Imperium sustains itself not through strength, but through the willingness of millions of people to accept unacceptable things, because the alternative seems worse. It operates on the calculated certainty that most people, when faced with the choice between complicity and death, will choose complicity. It counts on exhaustion, on fear, on the simple human desire to survive. And it is right. Most people do choose complicity. I do not judge them. I understand them. Survival is not a small thing. The desire to see another day, to preserve oneself and those one loves, these are fundamental. The system uses that fundamentality as weapon. But it is not universal. Some people, when they see the cost clearly, cannot pay it. Some people break under the weight of knowledge. Some people choose death over participation. I was one of those people. You might be as well. If you are, know this: your refusal matters, even if it changes nothing. The system wants you to believe that individual defiance is meaningless, that one person cannot alter vast mechanisms, that your death will be absorbed without ripple. This is true, and it is also irrelevant. You are not refusing to change the system. You are refusing to be changed by it. You are asserting that there are things more important than survival. You are drawing a line and saying, I will not cross this, even if crossing would preserve me. That line, invisible and ineffective as it may be, is the last defense against complete mechanization of the human soul. I do not know if the Emperor sees what is done in his name. I do not know if he cares, if he retains enough awareness to care, if he ever possessed the nature we attribute to him. But I know that I saw, and I cared, and I acted according to that care, even though action meant death. I was Cassia Ven. I was a Lumen Warden, 3rd class, in the Palace District of Eternal Vigil. I served for 17 years with precision and devotion. I believed I was keeping sacred light burning. I learned I was illuminating systematic murder. I chose to extinguish myself rather than continue illuminating it. I do not know if this was right. I only know it was necessary for me to preserve the part of myself that could still distinguish between righteousness and efficiency, between mercy and optimization, between faith and complicity. If you remember nothing else, remember this: the optimizations are not responses to heresy or corruption or any real threat. They are administrative protocol. They happen every 3 years with mechanical regularity. The people who authorize them are not monsters. They are exhausted, uncertain, broken people who have convinced themselves that smaller horror prevents larger catastrophe. They grieve even as they sign the designations. Their grief does not absolve them, but it makes them human, which makes the whole thing worse. Because if they were monsters, we could hate them purely. Because they are people, we must recognize our own capacity for the same calculations, the same compromises, the same slow descent into complicity justified by arithmetic. I failed to resist that descent through action. I could only resist it through refusal. That refusal killed me. I do not regret it. I regret only that I was complicit for 17 years before I found the courage to stop. Whatever you choose it with full knowledge. Choose it understanding the cost. Choose it knowing that there are no good options, only different calibrations of horror and compromise. I chose to die as myself. It was enough. It had to be enough. The light burns on without me. It will burn on without you. The palace will endure. The optimizations will continue. The Imperium will persist, vast and hungry and eternal. But you will know what you are, and that knowledge, terrible as it is the only freedom available. Keep it or surrender it as you will. I cannot tell you which is right. I can only tell you what I chose, and why, and what it cost. My name was Cassia Ven. I was a person, not a number. I mattered. So did everyone they optimized before me. So will everyone they optimize after. Remember us, if you can. Remember that we were not just efficiency statistics or population parameters or units exceeding optimal capacity. We were human. We were real. We lived and loved and believed and broke and died. And we deserved better than to be reduced to ledger entries in someone's arithmetic of necessary evil. The system that killed us will tell you it had no choice, that harsh mathematics demanded harsh actions, that our deaths prevented greater catastrophes. It will be partially right. That partial rightness is the cruelest thing of all, because if it were simply evil, it would be easier to resist. But it is complex and terrible and almost defensible, and that makes complicity seductive in ways pure evil never could. I could not resist that seduction through continued service. I could only resist it through ending my service entirely. This is my testimony. This is my witness. This is my final prayer. Offered not to the emperor who permitted this, but to you who read it, who might understand, who might carry forward the knowledge that some people refused. Not enough people. Not enough to change anything. But some. I was one of them. Perhaps you will be another. The choice, as always, is yours to make and yours to live with or die for. I chose death. I have no regrets. The light burns on. The system endures. The optimizations continue. But I am free of it now. Free of the complicity. Free of the knowledge. Free of the impossible weight of trying to serve righteousness while maintaining lights over systematic murder. If there is anything beyond this, any judgment or accounting or peace, I will face it knowing I refused in the end, that I saw clearly and chose accordingly. that I preserved my humanity even as I surrendered my life. It is not much. It is all I have. It will have to be enough. Remember us. We mattered. We were people. Cassia Ven, Lumen Warden 3rd Class. Palace District of Eternal Vigil, 17 years of service. Processed for optimization on the 13th day of the 4th month. Year 140, 2 of the 40, first millennium. Not a statistic. Not a number. Not a unit exceeding parameters. A person who chose to remain human. That is my epitaph. That is my testimony. That is my final light. Cast into darkness with the hope that someone, somewhere, might see it and understand. The choice was mine. The cost was mine. The truth is yours. Do with it what you will.